The furnace repairman canceled on me that Tuesday morning, which is the only reason I was home when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The caller ID showed First Cornerstone Bank, and I figured it was another automated fraud alert about some charge I'd already approved. But something made me pick up. Mr. Harlan. The voice belonged to a young woman, careful and professional. This is Denise Fowler at First Cornerstone. I'm calling about the wire transfer initiated this morning. We wanted to confirm you authorized the full amount before we process. I sat down at the kitchen table. What wire transfer? A pause. Sir, the transfer request came through your business account this morning. $480,000 to Meridian Holdings, LLC. Your son called to authorize it on your behalf. He said you'd be expecting our call. My son was supposed to be in Nashville, a 3-day agricultural conference. He'd shown me the hotel confirmation himself over Sunday dinner, sliding his phone across the table the way he always did when he wanted me to see something without having to explain it. Do not process that transfer, I said. I never authorized anything. Another pause, longer this time. Of course, Mr. Harlan. I'll place a hold immediately. But I do want you to know, this is the third inquiry we've received about your accounts in the past 6 weeks. I thanked her and set the phone down on the table. Outside the kitchen window, the November pasture stretched out brown and flat toward the tree line, the same view I'd looked at for 31 years. My wife Rose had loved that view. She'd had her morning coffee standing right where I was sitting, watching the light come up over the east field every single day until the last morning she was able to stand. The third inquiry. In 6 weeks, I drove to the bank first. Denise Fowler was a small woman in her early 30s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She pulled up the account on her screen and turned the monitor so I could see it. 2 previous inquiries about account access. One request, 3 weeks ago, to add a secondary signatory to my business accounts. The request had been submitted on my behalf. I hadn't submitted it. The name on the secondary signatory request was my daughter-in-law. I thanked Denise. I told her to flag any further activity and call me directly before processing anything. I gave her my cell number, not the house line. Then I sat in my truck in the bank parking lot for 11 minutes, watching people walk in and out through the glass doors, people who still believed the ground under their feet was solid. My son's name is my son. I built Harlan Family Grain, 43 years of crop cycles and equipment loans and droughts that nearly broke us and harvests that saved us. And I handed him the operational reins 5 years ago because I thought that was what a father was supposed to do. Because Rose had wanted it. Because I trusted him the way I trusted that the sun would come up over that east field every morning. I drove home and made 2 phone calls. The first was to a man named Ray Kowalski. A friend from my Rotary days had mentioned him once, the kind of mention that sticks with you without you knowing why. Private investigations, corporate, and financial. I'd written his number in the back of my address book 3 years ago and never thought about it again until now. Kowalski Investigations. The voice was unhurried, the kind of steady that made you want to trust it. My name is Walter Harlan, I said. I think someone is stealing my business. I need to know how far it's gone. The second call was to the county recorder's office in Mill Haven. Ray Kowalski drove down from Springfield the next morning in a gray pickup that looked like it belonged on a farm. He was maybe 55, thick through the shoulders, with the kind of face that didn't give much away. We sat at my kitchen table with the documents I'd already pulled from my filing cabinet. He studied them without speaking. I watched his eyes move across the pages, slow and methodical, and I thought about how Rose used to say that you could tell everything about a person's intelligence by the way they read. Walk me through the last 2 years, he said finally. I walked him through it. My son taking over day-to-day operations. My daughter-in-law becoming more involved in the business side, offering to handle vendor contracts and licensing renewals because she said I deserved to rest. A gradual softening of my access, not blocked, never blocked, just gently steered. Documents placed in front of me at the end of long days. A stack of purchase orders from the co-op, routine vendor renewals, and somewhere in the middle, something else. Ray pulled out his phone. He showed me a photograph of an order receipt. Office supply delivery to Harlan Family Grain, 14 months ago. One item. A self-inking signature stamp. Custom. My full legal name and title. I never ordered that, I said. I know you didn't. He turned the phone face down. Mr. Harlan, I want to be straightforward with you about what I'm seeing. The wire attempt this morning wasn't opportunistic. That was a closing move. Something made them push the timeline up. I thought about that. What would make them move early? Ray looked at me steadily. Sometimes it's an outside pressure, a deal with a deadline, or sometimes someone inside the operation got nervous. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark in the bedroom Rose and I had shared for 30 years and looked at the ceiling and thought about all the documents I'd signed at Sunday dinners and birthday parties and holiday gatherings. Pages slid my way with a smile and a pen. Trust me, Dad. It's just routine. And I had trusted him the way you trust something that grew inside your own life, something you watched become a person. By Thursday, the county recorder's office had pulled everything I'd requested. Ray met me at the Agricultural Extension office in Millhaven with a manila folder so thick it needed a rubber band. We spread the documents across the conference table in the empty meeting room. 3 parcels transferred out of Harlan Family Grain into something called Meridian Holdings, LLC over the past 14 months. The east parcel, the river bottom acreage, the grain storage facility on Route 9, combined assessed value, $1.2 million. But Ray had found the listing. The river bottom sold 4 months ago, he said. He turned the page. $840,000. Went directly to the LLC. My grandfather had bought that land in 1951. I pressed my hands flat on the table and breathed. There's more. Ray laid out a second set of documents. A petition filed with the probate court in Millhaven County 11 days ago, requesting that the court appoint a guardian for my financial and personal affairs on the grounds that I was showing signs of cognitive impairment sufficient to endanger my assets. The petition listed my son as proposed guardian. The date on the petition was the same week my daughter-in-law had stopped by the farm to bring me a casserole and ask how I was sleeping. I drove home in silence. The fields on either side of Route 12 were the same fields I'd driven past 10,000 times, but they looked different now, smaller, like something I was already losing. That evening, I called my daughter. My daughter lives 40 minutes north in Clover Hill with her husband and my 2 grandchildren. She'd gone quieter over the past year, I'd noticed, less talkative at Sunday dinners, something careful behind her eyes when her brother spoke. I'd told myself it was the stress of her husband's new job. I'd been telling myself a lot of things. She answered on the second ring. Dad. Her voice was strange. Not surprised. Not quite. I need to see you tomorrow, I said. Just you. No one else. A pause. Okay, she said. Okay, yes. I'll come to you. She arrived at 8 in the morning and she sat down across from me at the kitchen table and folded her hands the way her mother used to when she was about to say something difficult. How long have you known? She asked. The coffee in my cup went cold. Tell me what you know. She looked out the window at the east pasture. About 8 months, she said. I heard them talking at Easter. My brother and his wife, in the back hallway. She was explaining the LLC structure, how the transfers would work. She talked about the petition like it was a business plan. She looked back at me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have proof. If I came to you and I was wrong, it would have broken everything. So what did you do? I started watching. Her voice was steady. I went through whatever I could access. I took photographs. I kept a log with dates and times. I let them think I was supportive. My brother asked me twice if I thought you were slipping, and both times I said I wasn't sure. She reached into her bag and set a small external hard drive on the table. Everything I found is on here. I looked at the drive for a long moment. Rose's strength, I thought. She got Rose's strength, Dad. My daughter reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. There's something else. After Easter, when I started getting scared about all of it, I called Mom's friend Margaret, the one who handled Mom's personal things after she passed. I remember Margaret. She has something for you. Mom gave it to her 2 years ago, a few months before she got sick. She told Margaret to hold it and only give it to you if something happened that required it. Margaret saw the guardianship petition in the county notices last week. She squeezed my hand. She called me yesterday. Rose had known. I sat very still and let that thought settle through me the way cold water moves through soil. Ray Kowalski introduced me to a woman named Patricia Sundell, an elder law attorney out of Springfield with 22 years of courtroom experience. She had short silver hair and the kind of direct gaze that made you feel like wasting her time would be the worst mistake you could make. They filed for emergency guardianship, she told me at our first meeting, which means they've claimed you're an immediate danger to yourself. The hearing is set for December 9th. That gives us 18 days. Is that enough time? It depends on what you bring me. She looked at the documents Ray had assembled. This is a good start, but they'll have a physician. They'll have documented incidents. They'll have your son on the stand saying he watched you deteriorate. We need to counter every piece of that. The following Monday, I drove to Clover Ridge Medical Group and asked to see Dr. Ellen Park, a physician I'd chosen specifically because she had no connection to my family doctor, no connection to anyone my daughter-in-law might have already spoken to. Her waiting room was full of mothers with small children. I sat among them and read a magazine article about bread baking and waited. Dr. Park was in her mid-40s, unhurried and precise. She put me through 3 hours of evaluation, memory tests, pattern recognition, executive function assessments. She asked me to recall a list of 16 words, twice. She asked me to draw a clock set to a specific time. She asked me to explain the difference between a river and a canal, to count backward from 100 by sevens, to describe how I would handle a specific financial decision. Mr. Harlan, she said when it was over, your cognitive function is well within normal range for a man your age. Your memory scores are in the above-average category. I find no clinical evidence of impairment. I thanked her. She held my gaze for a moment. I want you to understand, she said carefully, that a motivated adversary can find a physician who will tell a different story. I'll testify to my findings. But prepare yourself for conflicting testimony. The week before the hearing, my daughter-in-law came to the farm. I saw her car turn off the county road from the upstairs window, and I stood very still and watched her park and walk to the front door. She was dressed the way she always dressed when she wanted something. The good coat, the careful smile that she'd perfected over 10 years of Sunday dinners. I let her in and offered coffee and listened while she told me how worried everyone was, how much her husband loved me, how the farm was simply too much for one man to manage, how the legal arrangements they were proposing were just common sense, just protection, just what any responsible family would do. She wandered into the study while I was in the kitchen. I took my time. When I brought the coffee out, she was standing near the desk, her eyes on the papers I'd left there. I'd left them there deliberately. Nothing incriminating, just enough to make her think she knew where I stood. You're doing so well, Walter, she said, accepting the cup. But we're a family. We take care of each other. That's all this is. After she left, I locked the front door and walked through every room. The day before the hearing, Margaret drove down from Peoria. She was a small woman in her late 70s, Rose's closest friend since college, and she sat in Rose's chair in the living room and set a sealed envelope on the coffee table between us. She made me promise, Margaret said. She said I'd know when the time was right. When I saw that notice in the county paper, I knew. The envelope was sealed with wax. Rose's handwriting on the front, just my name, just Walter, the way she'd written it on birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen counter for 40 years. I didn't open it until Margaret left. I sat in the living room in the quiet, and I broke the seal, and I read it, and the world outside the windows went very far away. My darling Walter, if you're reading this, then something I feared has become something real. I noticed it first at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. A comment your daughter-in-law made about the farm, about the succession plan, about when, instead of if, you would need help managing things. I've known you for 40 years. I know the difference between someone who loves a thing and someone who is calculating its value. I started paying attention after that. I found things I couldn't explain and things that frightened me. I didn't have enough to bring to you, and the cancer was moving faster than the doctors had told me. I had a choice between creating a conflict I couldn't finish and trusting someone who could. I told our daughter what I suspected last spring. I asked her to watch after I was gone, to be careful, to wait for something solid before she moved. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I'm sorry I left you to walk into this without me standing beside you. But I knew you, Walter Harlan. I knew you would fight. I love you. Even from wherever I am still in your corner. Always yours. Rose. She had enclosed 6 printed pages. Bank statements. An email she'd printed from a family computer. A conversation between my son and my daughter-in-law about accelerating the asset transfer timeline. A handwritten log with dates, times, and notes in Rose's careful handwriting. 8 months of quiet watching before the cancer took what was left of her strength. December 9th came gray and cold. The Millhaven County Courthouse was a limestone building that looked like it had been there since before the county itself. Patricia Sundell met me on the steps with her briefcase and her reading glasses on her nose. "Are you ready?" she asked. My son and my daughter-in-law were already inside, seated at the petitioner's table with their attorney, a man named Grover Hutchins, who had a reputation for elder guardianship cases that Patricia had described, carefully, as aggressive. My daughter-in-law wore a charcoal suit. My son didn't look at me when I walked in. Judge Harold Brennan was in his mid-60s himself, which I noticed and which seemed relevant in a way I couldn't quite name. He reviewed the filings. He noted that I was present and represented. Something shifted in his expression. Hutchins opened with practiced concern, a devoted father and respected community member. Signs of decline following the loss of his wife. Confusion about business matters. Minor incidents that pointed to a larger pattern. An affidavit from a physician in Denton who had evaluated me, Hutchins said, based on reports from family members, and concluded that cognitive assessment was warranted. He called my son to the stand. My son sat with his hands folded and talked about check errors and misplaced keys, and a time I had forgotten the name of a pesticide supplier I'd worked with for 20 years. He talked about it with something that looked like grief, and the remarkable thing was that I believed he had convinced himself that somewhere in the gap between who he had been and what he had done, he had found a way to make the story true. Patricia stood for cross-examination. When your father misplaced his keys, did he find them? Yes, eventually. And the check error. Was it corrected? Yes, but has your father been late on a single debt payment to First Cornerstone Bank in the past 3 years? A pause. No. Has he missed a property tax filing? A licensing renewal? A co-op payment? My son's jaw tightened. No. Patricia returned to our table. She called Ray Kowalski, who walked the judge through the asset transfers, the LLC structure, the signature stamp ordered on company accounts 14 months ago. He put the purchase order on the screen. He traced the movement of $840,000 out of the River Bottom sale into the LLC, and from the LLC into a secondary account bearing only my daughter-in-law's name. The courtroom went very quiet. Patricia called Dr. Park by video conference. Dr. Park was precise and unhurried. Above-average memory function. Normal executive capacity. No clinical evidence of impairment. She looked directly into the camera when she spoke, and she did not look away. Then Patricia said, "Your Honor, I'd like to call the respondent's daughter to the stand." My daughter walked to the witness box, and she sat down and she looked at her brother for a long moment. Something in her face that was sad and decided at the same time. Hutchins objected before Patricia could begin. "Your Honor, this witness is not listed on the original." "She's listed on the amended filing from Monday," Patricia said. Mr. Hutchins received the amended filing. Judge Brennan looked at Hutchins. Hutchins sat down. My daughter testified for 31 minutes. She described Easter Sunday and the hallway conversation. She described 8 months of watching, logging, photographing documents. She described allowing her brother to believe she was on his side, attending their planning meetings, pretending to agree, all while building a record on the hard drive she now handed to the bailiff. "When did you decide to come forward?" Patricia asked. My daughter looked at me. When Dad called me, Hutchins stood for cross-examination. He was going to ask whether she stood to inherit, whether her testimony was motivated by financial interest. You could see him building toward it. Before he could speak, my daughter reached into her bag and set a sealed envelope on the railing of the witness box. "Your Honor, I'd also like to submit a document given to me by a family friend. It was written by my mother approximately 2 years ago and held in trust pending circumstances that would require it. My mother signed and dated it in front of 2 witnesses. She looked at Judge Brennan. She anticipated this hearing. The seal was reviewed. The witnesses were verified. Patricia read Rose's letter into the record. The courtroom was very still when she finished. My son had his face in his hands. My daughter-in-law was looking at the wall behind the judge's bench, her expression the particular blankness of someone running calculations. Hutchins said nothing. He sat down and said nothing. Judge Brennan looked at the documents before him for a long time. Then he looked at the table where my daughter-in-law sat, and then at Hutchins, and his expression told you everything about what 30 years on the bench does to a person's ability to recognize what they are looking at. "I've presided over a significant number of guardianship petitions," he said. "The great majority involve genuine concern and genuine care. This is not one of those cases." He set the documents down. "The petition for guardianship is denied. Walter Harlan has demonstrated before this court that he is fully and completely competent to manage his own affairs." He paused. "What he has also demonstrated, with the assistance of the evidence submitted today, is that a systematic effort has been made to defraud him of assets built over a lifetime of work. I am referring this matter to the Millhaven County District Attorney's Office and to the Illinois State Police Financial Crimes Unit for immediate review. I am ordering the immediate freezing of all Meridian Holdings LLC accounts pending investigation." He looked directly at my daughter-in-law. "Ma'am, I would strongly advise you not to make any travel arrangements in the near future." The gavel came down. Patricia's hand was on my shoulder. I sat for a moment and just breathed. My daughter was already moving toward me. We met in the aisle, and she held on. And I thought about Rose, about all the watching she had done in silence, in the last months when her strength was going, spending what she had left on, protecting something she would not live to see protected. I held my daughter and did not let go for a long time. The investigation moved quickly. The State Police Financial Crimes Unit had the LLC accounts frozen within 48 hours. A forensic accountant the DA's office brought in, a precise woman named Dr. Sylvia Tran, spent 3 weeks going through 14 months of transfers. She sat across from me in the county attorney's conference room in the second week of January and laid out what she had found in plain, flat language that somehow hit harder than anything else had. Total assets transferred out of Harlan Family Grain into the LLC over 14 months. Approximately $1.6 million. Of that, $840,000 came from the river bottom sale. The remaining amount moved in smaller increments. Vendor account redirections, equipment sale proceeds, a grain futures payout. She paused. "We've recovered approximately $1.3 million through the account freezes. Roughly $300,000 was moved offshore before the freeze. That money is currently inaccessible." "My daughter-in-law?" I asked. "Boarded a flight to Cancun 9 days ago. She has not returned. An arrest warrant has been issued. Extradition proceedings are underway." Dr. Tran looked at me. "It will take time, but there is an active warrant, and Mexico cooperates on financial fraud cases at the federal level. She will likely face charges." That was the word that mattered. Likely wasn't certain. But the warrant was real, the case was real, and she was not going to simply disappear into ease. My son's case moved separately. He met with the DA's office 3 times over December and January. His attorney negotiated. The picture that emerged, slowly, over those weeks, was something I had to sit with in pieces before I could hold it as a whole. He had started with what he told himself was expedience, a restructuring, a way to simplify the estate. His wife had been the architect, the one who understood the structure and built it, and he had followed. And then he had been in too deep to climb back out, and then the climbing back out had started to feel like the more dangerous thing. He pled guilty in February to 1 count of financial exploitation of an elderly person and 1 count of wire fraud, 22 months in federal custody, full restitution of all funds received, a permanent bar from serving as an officer or director of any agricultural or financial enterprise. His attorney had pushed for probation. The prosecutor had asked for 4 years. 22 months was where it landed. The day after sentencing, I drove to the south corner of the river bottom acreage and stood at the fence line and looked at the land my grandfather had bought in 1951 for less money than I now spent on equipment maintenance in a single year. The bare cottonwoods along the creek, the flat gray water, the far bank that had been part of my life since before I had language for it. We had not recovered the river bottom itself. The sale to the development company had gone through before the freeze. That land was gone, and I had to let that be true without letting it be the whole truth. Rose had stood at this fence line too, on a morning 30 years ago, early summer, and she'd said that land was just a ledger for everything you put into it. Your labor, your patience, your willingness to start over after a bad year. She'd said the ledger didn't disappear because the land changed hands. I turned and walked back to my truck. My daughter came by that Sunday with her husband and my grandchildren, a boy of 12 and a girl of 9 with Rose's eyes and a question for everything. We had pot roast and my daughter's attempt at Rose's dinner rolls, which were not quite right but were made with enough care that it didn't matter. After dinner, my granddaughter climbed into the chair beside me on the porch. It was cold, but neither of us moved. "Grandpa, are you okay?" she asked. "I am," I told her. "Mom says Grandma was really smart. She was the smartest person I ever knew." My granddaughter pulled her knees up to her chest. "She protected you even after she was gone. That's pretty cool." I looked out at the east pasture, where the light was going gold along the stubble rows, and thought about all the mornings Rose had stood at the kitchen window watching that same light, storing it up in the quiet way she stored everything. And I said yes, that was pretty cool. In March, I hired a new operations manager for Harlan Family Grain. Her name is Janet Brower, 38, with a decade of agricultural management in central Illinois. She came with references I verified personally, and an approach to transparency that made it clear she understood why I was asking for it. We rebuilt the vendor accounts, the access protocols, the record-keeping systems from the ground up. In April, the River Bottom Development Company reached out through a real estate broker. They were reconsidering the project. The zoning had changed. Would I consider a right of first refusal arrangement on a buyback option? I told the broker I'd think about it. I thought about it for 3 days, and then I called the Patterson family, who had farmed the land adjacent to the river bottom for 4 generations, and I told them about the option and gave them the first call on it at cost if the buyback came through. They said they'd need to talk to their bank. I said, take your time. Some things you rebuild directly. Some things you rebuild by how you go about the rebuilding. The extradition process was still ongoing when spring came. The warrant was active, the cooperation was proceeding, and my attorney told me it would likely be resolved before the end of the year. Likely, not certainly. I had learned to hold likely with both hands open. One Saturday in April, I drove up to the federal facility in Pontiac. I signed in and sat in the visiting room and waited. My son came in and sat across the table, and he looked like a man who had spent 4 months taking himself apart and hadn't decided yet what he was going to build back. "I didn't come to forgive you," I said. "I'm not ready for that yet, and I won't pretend otherwise." He nodded. He had Rose's hands, I noticed again. Long fingers, the same way of holding still. "I came because you're my son," I said, "and because your mother would have come, and because whatever you did, I am not going to let it be the last thing between us." He looked at the table for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were red. "I don't deserve that," he said. "Probably not yet," I said. "But we've got time." The drive home took 40 minutes down a straight highway through flat fields just beginning to green. I had the windows down, which was still cold, but I wanted the air. I thought about what Rose had written, that she had known I was strong enough, and I thought about how she had been right and also how she had been wrong, because the strength had not been mine alone. It had been hers, stored up in a sealed envelope and passed through steady hands, and my daughter's 8 months of careful silence, and even in some way my son's. In the moment he'd had the capacity to feel what he'd done as a thing that could be named. The fields ran past on both sides. The sky was the pale particular blue of early spring in Illinois. I pressed the accelerator and pointed the truck toward home, toward the east pasture, and the tree line, and the kitchen, where my granddaughter would be helping her mother with dinner, and where the chair by the window still held the shape of everything Rose had been. 63 years had taught me this. The people who love you most will sometimes tell you the hardest truth in the hardest possible way, and the ones who want something from you will always make it sound like a kindness. Learn to hear the difference. Trust the ones who show you the same face in the dark that they show you in the light. And never, not once, let anyone convince you that the years behind you are a weakness rather than everything you have ever learned about staying alive. I was home before dark. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, and the house smelled the way it always smelled. Wood and old coffee and something that had no name but had been there since the beginning. Since the first morning Rose and I had stood in the empty rooms and decided this was the place. Family was coming for dinner. I had an hour. I put the kettle on and stood at the kitchen window and watched the last light move across the east field, slow and gold and unchanged, the way it had always moved, the way it would keep moving long after all of us had gone. Some things you can take from a man, Some things hold their shape no matter what you do to them. I turned and started setting the table.